Let's make this a quick one, because I'm still tired as fuck. Just like before, with my previous video, please do not assume that me being tired as fuck has anything to do with the album in question, because it does not. In fact, I can't even blame Chompy this time around. This time around, I'm tired because I'm a fucking man-child who's playing Pokemon at 2 in the fucking morning. It's that fucking simple. Well, actually, now that I think about it, the album in question in today's video might actually have something to do with all of this, because while I was going on these excursions into the wild and highly unpolished world of Pokemon Legends Arceus, whatever the fuck it's called, my sonic companion was none other than this self-titled album from Zeal and Ardor. For just about a decade now, this Swiss-American band under the guidance of one Manuel Gagnon has been fusing black metal and avant-garde and Negro spirituals and classic American folk and gospel and blues music together in spellbinding fashion. Without question, one of the most unique bands to pop out of heavy metal in the 2010s, and as such have been responsible for some of the most unique music to pop out of metal in the 2010s. Their 2018 record, Stranger Fruit in particular, I would argue is one of the best albums in recent memory. I genuinely feel comfortable saying that that album is an absolute masterpiece. It was just an absolutely soul-crushing display. So much pain, so much anguish, so much agony, transformed through, like, American gospel and folk tunes with, like, ripping melodic black metal fury. It was fucking incredible. As was the 2020 EP Wake of a Nation, even despite being so much more modern than Stranger Fruit, having been heavily inspired by political and social unrest, namely the Black Lives Matter movement, police brutality, and the murder of George Floyd. With this in mind, it should not at all be surprising for you to hear that this is one of my most anticipated albums of 2020. What might be surprising for some of y'all to hear, though, is that this self-titled album, in the grand scheme of Zeal and Ardor's discography, feels like a bit of a step down in comparison to Stranger Fruit and Wake of a Nation. I'm not even sure it stands on the same level as the debut, Devil is Fine. Now, just to be clear, I am not suggesting that this is a terrible album, or even a mediocre album, because it is not. Spoiler alert, it's still a very good album. It's very well made. It's very ambitious, performed with the utmost confidence and fire and spirit and anger. But this time around, the songs just aren't leaving that same kind of impact that songs from Stranger Fruit and Wake of a Nation did. Not for me, at least. And I think that has a lot to do with the overall design of the record. If Stranger Fruit is their master of puppets, then this feels more like the Black Album. It's more refined, it's more mature, it's bigger, it's louder, it's poppier, it's more accessible, but it's not quite as heavy, it's not quite as hefty, it's not quite as powerful. Still pretty powerful in its own regard and by its own merit, but you know. I mean, I don't consider myself an elitist. I love the Black Album. I think it's a great album, but am I ever gonna pick it over Master of Puppets? Fuck no. Same thing here. This is a very good album, but I am not ever picking this over Stranger Fruit. Not gonna happen. Nuh-uh. Sorry, bud. But hey, credit where it's due. Metallica's self-titled album, aka the Black Album, still had some fucking jams. And so does Zeal and Ardor's self-titled album, which doesn't have a nickname, but maybe we'll give it one down the line. We'll see. One of those jams being Death to the Holy, a pretty straightforward but gnarly as fuck kind of black metal, groove metal banger with some soulful vocals and a pretty provocative chorus. I feel like if Behemoth ever tried to make a more radio-friendly metal song, it would probably sound a little bit like this. There's also Feed the Machine, which leans heavily into Zeal and Ardor's Negro spiritual and American blues influences, borrowing a melody that almost feels like it could be sung by a fucking Chang gang and infusing it with some very hypnotic and abrasive kind of avant-garde black metal. There's also Götterdämmerung, one of my favorite tracks on the record, which just constantly spews gnarly, blackened grooves at you. Who needs a fucking chiropractor when you can snap your back over one of these fucking bad boys? And honestly, I don't even mind some of the more straightforward kind of blues rock, hard rock numbers like Golden Lyre and Bow. The former of which just oozes pure southern grit and charm and sizzle, while the latter packs some very provocative lyrics that would not at all have been out of place on the Wake of a Nation EP. Writing here, a young girl screams death to the nation, a Greek god on the back of a stallion coming up on a 3-lane highway. Prepare for the death of 1 billion. Wake up at the end of my day. Going on to say, cower in shame, come on now. Who gonna weep for the dead? Cower in shame, come on now. Who gonna weep for the dead? Bow down to the American way. That final line, by the way, bow down to the American way, is drilled pretty far into your head as it is repeated over and over and over again on top of some very soulful crooning, some very angry lead vocals from Manuel, and some pretty heavy, simplistic kind of blues rock chugging. I want to say, too, Manuel's doing a really good job vocally on this record. He has toned down on a lot of the black metal shrieks and howls and roars, whereas on an album like Stranger Fruit, it was more of a 50-50 mix of clean vocals and like rough screamed vocals. Now it's more of a 70-30 mix, but I don't really mind because Manuel's regular singing voice is so good. There's so much soul, there's so much personality, so much pain. He's a really great fucking singer. And the rest of the band is doing a great job as well. I do wish the guitar tone was a little sharper, and I wish the songs themselves were a little bit more dynamic and aggressive in some parts, but overall it's really hard to argue with what we have here, or more appropriately, really hard to complain. But I'm going to because, you know, that's unfortunately how a review works. Erosion, for instance, falls pretty fucking flat for me. I'm not opposed to hearing some electronic beats mixed with some more straightforward kind of black metal riffery and instrumentation, but the execution just isn't really all that exciting, and those high-pitched wailing vocals are a little bit too ghost bath for my personal liking. While I am a fan of the foundation upon which Erase is built, I'm not a huge fan of some of the weirder, angular guitar parts and little bits and pieces floating around in the forefront of the sound. It's kind of awkward, it's kind of annoying, it sounds like something that would have been very quickly rejected by Dillinger Escape Plan in the late 2000s. And the double whammy of the album's introductory track, also titled Zeal and Ardor and Run, just doesn't really do a fucking thing for me. I'm not a big fan of the backing vocals, especially in Run. I feel like the harsher black metal vocals could be a little higher in the mix as well. I will say, under the circumstances, and considering how much bigger Zeal and Ardor are now in comparison to 2018, this is probably the best a follow-up album to Stranger Fruit could have been. And again, by its own merit, in its own regard, still a very good album, just not as good. So I'm giving it a 3.5 out of 5. I still enjoyed a lot of what's on this album. I still really love the weird concoction of sounds and styles and influences that Zeal and Ardor has that nobody else has. If you're looking for something super weird and spicy and funky, something different from the normal black metal and extreme metal that you might normally digest, give this a shot. I do think this is also a more accessible album than Stranger Fruit, so with that in mind, if you are less comfortable with extreme metal, I would actually recommend this over Stranger Fruit. Who knows, maybe this would encourage you to check out some other kind of avant-garde or melodic black metal, other Zeal and Ardor stuff, or other branches of the extreme metal tree. Yeah, like I said, it's basically Zeal and Ardor's answer to something like the Black Album. It's more mature, it's more refined, it's more accessible. Not my personal favorite album. It's definitely not topping Wake of a Nation, Stranger Fruit, Devil is Fine, but you know what? It's still a fucking good album, and at the end of the day, isn't that what matters? And that is it for the Metal Meltdown. I'm not an expert, nor do I claim to be, so what do you think? Do you like this record? Do you not like this record? And what do you want to hear from me next? And thank you for watching. Make sure you press subscribe right here so you get updates on the Metal Meltdown fucking immediately. And as always, you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.